Hello. I never know when to say hello. A lot of these videos people start with, hey guys, and I don't know. I usually start with staring at the screen for a little bit, and it's very hard for me to look straight at myself and just talk. So don't mind me, I'm looking at the sunset right now. I'm not in a great location for it. At my house anyway. And right now I'm walking up a very short hill. That's my commitment to myself, my little bite. And it's close enough to my house that if my hips start saying stop, I don't have far to go. That's my strategy. We need strategy, not just commitment. Someone moved in across the alley at the fancy Border Patrol housing. A lot of people got angry at the colors, but they've muted, because that's what the sun does to paint. It mutes it. I have the war planes above me, and contractors driving like maniacs on my quiet little street, and you can't see the sunset because it goes down below the Little A Mountain, which is one of the biggest mountains here. But behind me, you see what I never really saw in Washington, maybe once, the reflected sunset. Whenever there's a good sunset and clouds over there, we get these nice lavender and pink. Sometimes they're all pink. Oh, that's pretty. Let me see if I can show you again. See? And they look like cotton candy. Some of them are raining, and we were supposed to get showers today, but we did not. And what was I going to do? I was going to tell you about commitment and strategy. No, that's how I started it, but what I was going to talk about was grief and analogies to grief. And it came from a couple of videos, a couple of memes, and they talked about the difference in how the different genders grieve. And I don't think that that's a biochemical reality. Okay, I don't think that 80% of that's a biochemical reality. I made it to the top. Oh, there's a road that way. Interesting. Anyway, what I do think about grief and whether it's, do you see up my nose? The weather's making it drip. In terms of gender, is that a lot of times when they say women do this and men do that, they're really talking class culture. And most of America fit into a certain class culture. So, a lot of American women, a lot of American men do that. Well, so when I say women do this, or men do this, I'm really talking about people who fit in an American demographic that's trained, you know. Even the most impoverished Americans are often wealthier or have more advantages than those in other parts of the world. They don't have time for this to be trained this way. And I don't have the knowledge to speak of, say, how Italian women in Italy do it versus Italian men in Italy. I'm talking only about most women that I know in my experience over time in this country. Are you ready yet? This is going to be long. Grief. Women hit that point of grief where when you lose someone, you didn't just lose that one person. That person becomes all of the people and the dogs, even a celebrity like say Robin Williams, that they have lost in time. And men typically, when they lose someone, say they become widowed, when they think about that person, they're thinking about that person. They're focused on their needs to be with that person and their losses of not having that person present, and the grief of losing that person. Now think of it like every time they lose someone, it goes in a pile, all the emotions, one big pile of knots. Okay, everybody puts it in knots. If we think of our emotions like string theory emotions, all of our emotions are strings that go into this protective blanket around us, security blanket. And it's woven so carefully by people who loved us while we were children. You hope it has. I mean, some people don't even get that when they're children. But they're wrapped up in a security blanket that was made with love. And when you lose someone, the threads get pulled. I'm gonna go up the hill again. The threads get pulled, torn, cut, knotted up. When you have trauma, they go into knots. The threads get taken from other spots. Your security blanket becomes threadbare in some areas, like you can see right through it. Or maybe that's all that's hanging on over your shoulders is threads. You don't have a lot of security. But strangely enough, you might have the same amount of material that you started with. It's just a tangled, knotted up bunch of strings. It's not even pretty the way a macrame hanging plant hanger is pretty. It's not even pretty. It's just a bunch of strings with a lot of knots. And when you have a blanket around you, a nice, heavy, thick blanket. Is everybody coming home today? That blanket is, well, the weight distributes around you. Maybe it's a big, heavy blanket, But once you put it on, cool. But if you took all those threads and put them into some big knots, and now you got to carry it, not only is it not protecting you, it's freaking heavy and awkward. And you want to put it down, but where do you put it down at? It's a security blanket you've had for freaking lifetime. Where do you put this big knot, bunch of knots? Where do you, in the dirt? Where do you put it? Healing is the process of pulling threads. And I don't know if you've ever tried to untangle a bunch of yarn, big pile of yarn. Sometimes you make a bigger mess. Well, you're unknotting things. Have you ever tried to untangle a bunch of Christmas lights? You make a mess first. So think of your therapy journey, your shadow work, whatever you want to call it, your healing, as plucking the threads. And when you pluck them, you're untangling them. But you also need to weave them back into the blanket, the security blanket. And some of that stuff, do you want that in your security blanket? I'll tell you why you do. But before I do that, I want to get back to the difference between women grieving and men grieving. Like I said, men put their grief in piles, separate piles. This person over here, and the dog here, and their goldfish over here, and when they lost their parent right next to them. And sometimes they push one aside to put another closer. And they visit those piles. But those threads are cut from them. Men are better at compartmentalizing than women are. I'm very good at compartmentalizing. So consequently, most of my friends have been men. The only women who related to me or understood me well, most of their friends were men, because we were good at certain things. And one of them is compartmentalizing. So when they do start to work on a grief, they work on one. They're not working on the giant knot, that big ball of knotted thread. They're not completely bare of security until they've lost all of theirs. But they're also quite good at borrowing patches of somebody else's security blanket and not giving it back. And that's one reason why widowed women live longer than widowed men. Because by and large, their husband dies. They love their husband, but their husband was using their wife's security blanket. And as hard as it is to say, when he dies, the wife gets the blanket back. And she's no longer investing time and energy in mending his blanket. Her blanket on his shoulders. She's mending hers. This is not true for every widow, because sometimes women marry men who didn't need their wife to be their therapist. That happens. Usually in the third, fourth, fifth marriage, because those of us who marry men who need us as their therapist, it takes us a while to get it right. I'm not getting it right. So widows live longer. They have their blanket back. They have a mended blanket back. They're no longer taking care of his. And when men lose a wife, they lose their therapist. They lose the person who was largely responsible for his mental health. And his blanket is cut up into pieces all around him, into all these trauma and grief piles. And he'd pick them up and get his wife to deal with it, and she would, and he'd wear her blanket. And sometimes, oh really, when she dies, her blanket goes with her. And this is why they marry a week or two after being widowed. Sadly. Don't marry that man. I'm telling you. They mean well. But their grief is different. So when you as a widow meet a man as a widower, and you feel like he can relate to your grief just because of that fact, get some verification that he can actually relate. And if he's not doing therapy, and you are, or you are self-aware enough to handle therapy through other means, don't marry that guy. Marriage is not really compatible with the needs of most elderly women anyway, let alone widows. Your grief is different. Maybe it's cultural. Maybe it's biogenetic. Maybe it's estrogen. But your grief very likely is different. That's all. You're gonna find your path. You're gonna mend your blanket. You're going to turn the knots into something beautiful, because macrame is pretty cool. Crochet is pretty cool. Knitting's pretty cool. Weaving, pretty cool. And knots are a part of that. But they'll be the knots that you tied on purpose, with artistic flair, with crafting. Okay? You'll be okay.